This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martilla. We're joined by Matthew Spaulding of the Heritage Foundation. He's a constitutional scholar and author, and his latest book is entitled, We Still Hold These Truths, Rediscovering Our Principles, Reclaiming Our Future. In the book, he details the core principles of America, how they are under attack by liberals, and he suggests a strategy to recover them. Welcome to Newsmax, Matthew.
Great to be with you.
Let's talk about the very controversial health care reform legislation passed by the House and Senate. Now, critics say it was written by liberals for liberals. We understand control of health care by the left is not something that started with Hillary Care or Obamacare, but has a deep-seated history. Would you kindly explain that for us?
No, that's right. You have to understand that modern liberalism itself grows out of progressivism, which goes back about 100 years. The first federal health care legislation was introduced in the 1912 Progressive Platform. This is something the left has been constantly trying to go back to. FDR talked about it. Obviously, Hillary Clinton talked about it as well. It's part of a larger agenda to shape large segments of American society and its economy, and now healthcare as an industry, and put it under the administrative state, or the bureaucracy as we would call it today. And this piece of legislation is a classic example of that. 1/6 of the American economy will now be placed under essentially unelected bureaucrats to run for us, and we're going to have to participate in that.
The Republicans say there are several provisions in the health care reform bill that are unconstitutional. Let's discuss some of those. Senators Orrin Hatch and John Ensign target the mandate that every American purchase health insurance or face a steep IRS penalty. Democrats say they can do that under the Commerce Clause or General Welfare Clause. Please give us your take on the mandate.
The mandate is probably the clearest and most unconstitutional specific aspect of the health care bill. Let's think about this for a moment. They're saying that under the United States Constitution, Congress has the power to require an individual who is doing nothing, mind you, to purchase health care. That's to say that Congress can force someone to be involved in a contract for which they are choosing to do nothing. That is not regulating commerce. There's no commerce involved in that. They've chosen to not be participating. If we say that the Commerce Clause includes that kind of non-activity, there's a radical expansion of that clause of the Constitution, which is to say that Congress can do anything. It would be radically unlimited. This is completely unprecedented. And even if you look at the recent cases of the Supreme Court, which see a broader view of the Commerce Clause, even if you look at it that way, this aspect of the legislation, I think, clearly violates even current Supreme Court jurisprudence on this question.
The special deal that Nebraska Senator Ben Nelson cut with Harry Reid, in essence subsidizing Medicaid recipients in his state only at the expense of the other 49. Now, 13 Republican attorneys general are lining up to challenge that. Do they have a case, do you think?
The Nebraska Compromise is clearly constitutional suspect. First, we need to step back and just kind of laugh at it for a moment. It is so blatantly controversial in a sense of an old Tammany Hall way of doing politics, and it's come out very clearly here. It's a great example of how Congress generally operates in a way that I think does violate the spirit of the Constitution left and right. I mean, in normal intercourse, we would call this bribery. In Congress, this is called how legislation is done. But let's get to the specifics for a moment. The claim here is that by forcing 49 states to pay for something, in this case Medicare, and exempting forever a particular state, Nebraska, this is a constitutional violation. I think the particulars in this case are actually kind of difficult, but they're there. It's really mostly a violation of the General Welfare Clause. Congress cannot do something like this in terms of spending money in a way that is not uniform with the other states. But having said that, there's also just a general violation all over the place, which violates the general notion that the states have equal standing in the country through the Constitution. Whether we look at various clauses about their existing powers of states or how they're treated through taxation, spending, capitation, whatever it might be. A case can be made. I think it should be pushed. More so, I think this actually points to a general disregard of Congress about how the Constitution ought to shape how they make their laws.
How about the language in the overhaul bill that says certain parts of it cannot be later repealed or amended? Does that pass constitutional muster?
Now, here, this is actually a very interesting example. There's a provision in the law which says this provision can't be changed, essentially, by future Congresses, except with a supermajority. It actually changes the rules of the Senate and the House in order to restrict them. what this does is effectively tries to bind future Congresses. Now, that's both a technical violation, but also a general violation of the whole scope and meaning of constitutional law. The notion of a constitution, and of the rule of law for that matter, is that what a legislature does cannot bind the future, in the same way you can't pass what are called ex post facto laws to change the past. The notion, the audacity of putting something in to prevent this ever from being changed, repealed, amended, is a violation of the Constitution, but is also just insulting to the way that a constitutional rule of law system operates.
All right, if you could possibly play prognosticator with us for a moment, Matthew. How soon after Obama signs this final legislation would you expect the first legal challenge?
I think this legislation will cause court challenges the day it's signed very quickly. You immediately have standing by all the states that are getting the short end of the stick, not only in terms of the Nebraska deal, but in terms of the individual mandate. You very quickly will have individuals and corporations within the industry who are harmed, and eventually this will affect individuals when that first individual is fined because they chose not to buy health care insurance. This is a piece of legislation just aching, if you will, for judicial challenge. And believe me, in the current state of the popular opinion, in the current state of the debate, this will happen very quickly and I believe very seriously, given what they have unintentionally but very clearly written into the legislation in the first place. There are plenty of places to hang your hat in this legislation. This is going to keep lawyers busy for a very long time.
All right, if one or all of the provisions we discussed are declared unconstitutional, what happens then? Is the entire legislation shot down or just those parts of it?
The parts would be, they can shut down parts of it, and some things actually allow for that and could easily be severable. Other things, however, can't be. And here actually becomes a very practical problem they would have. The mandate, which is the idea that all individuals have to be involved in this system, is absolutely necessary to bring in younger individuals who are healthier and are going to be paying more so that you have money to pay for the rest of the system. That is, the mandate is an actual practical necessity to make the system work. If the individual mandate were to be declared unconstitutional, not only would you have a problem with the constitutionality of the legislation, but the actual workings of the healthcare system they have envisioned would actually collapse and you could no longer pay for it, which is a much bigger problem as a practical matter that they face if that were to happen.
All right, how would you rate this in the spectrum of other historical power grabs by the left?
This is one of the most massive power grabs I can imagine if you think about it back in history. If you compare it to large pieces of legislative reform, Medicare itself, Social Security, those are almost always done in a bipartisan manner. They're done in almost an experimental way to see how this works. They're highly debated, and I don't necessarily like them myself, but it's done in a way that respects the legislative process. Here you have a piece of legislation that does some radically unconstitutional things, wildly unprecedented, that represent a massive takeover of a very large part of the American economy, all of that being unprecedented. But what is happening is it's being done in a very partisan way, behind closed doors, when it's increasingly the case that more and more of the public are opposed to the legislation. This is a recipe for a very large political debate. I think looking forward to elections in the future, this will radically change how those happen. If it is successful, however, I think we are putting into place a radical power grab that will be used to not only as a precedent for other things, but as a mechanism to gain control of large aspects of American life heretofore unregulated by the state. And I see that as very dangerous.
Matthew Spalding of the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for sharing your views with us here.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV. Sarah Palin's new book, Going Rogue in American Life, will be released on November 17th. You can be among the first to get your copy. Check out our incredible